Hello guys, and we're here today with another very awesome deck profile. We're here today with some DDDs, yes DDDs, because this deck I find still to be an underrated, if I can speak and pronounce my words, deck of this format that is honestly pretty good. Now I've done a couple of DDD deck profile and I've said that before, and I've always said that the deck needs more support, but honestly if we got that new support it would really change the playstyle that this deck has. And this deck playstyle, I've made it all around out resourcing your opponent every step of the way. This deck's goal is to, over multiple turns, you should have more cards than your opponent should, and your opponent just can't beat you, because if they try to get rid of your field, if they do get rid of the field, which they will, you will be able to bounce back, get rid of their field, and they won't be able to bounce back. You can see that in cards such as like our Necro Slime here, just like, oh, you got rid of my field, well now I get to remake my field at no cost, pretty much no cost. So let's just go into the deck profile. Oblivion King Abyss Ragnarok, his pendulum effect is if you special summon a DD monster, you can special summon a DDD monster, no, just a double D monster, and special summon it, and if you do take 1000 damage and your opponent takes half damage for the rest of the turn, his monster effect's a lot better. If this card is special summoned, or normal summoned, you can target a triple D monster in your graveyard, special summon it, and that's it. But then its other effect is you can tribute a DDD monster, or no, just a double D monster, target a monster opponent controls and banish it. So it's our monster reborn, because it special summons from the graveyard, and it's our BLS. So that is pretty good, guys. That is awesome for this guy, just being able to summon out a monster and then tribute off of Kepler's and banish cards. Just again, out resourcing your opponent because you got 2 cards and your opponent lost a monster. King Leonidas, he isn't the greatest card in the deck, but he definitely has a place in this deck because he's a level 7, so he's just fodder for our rank 7s, but nonetheless he's still very important because if you can't make dark, this guy's, you need him. If his pendulum effect, which you never use, if you take effect damage, you can destroy this card. Any effect damage that would inflict damage to a player this turn increases their life points by the same amount instead. You never use that. Its pendulum effect is if you take damage, you can spell something from your hand and gain the exact same amount of damage, and you take no effect damage while he's face up on the field. So he helps prevent us from dying from our dark contracts. And then Burfame can change the levels of your DDD monsters, which helps with making the rank 8 and the rank 4. That's the only thing you can make at that point, because you have to special summon DD monsters for the rest of the turn, which is a little bit annoying because there are a lot of good rank 7s and rank 8s, and if I could make other monsters after using effect, I'd probably be running more rank 4s, such as Utopia the Lightning, which came out recently. And then Scroll Slime and Necro Slime. For DDD players, there tends to be a ratio. I like this ratio because Scroll Slime is very useful. Like, it's hard to say which one's more useful, because like I said, Necro Slime will allow you to Miracle Fusion from your graveyard, just banishing him and some other guy, and you can make dark. And Scroll Slime allows you to fusion summon from your hand, using monsters in your hand, and then of course you can banish him from your graveyard to special summon a double D monster or a triple D monster. If it's double D, then triple D's count as well from your hand, and so that's very important. So when you're searching out, you have to decide with your hand, like what you have. Do you want to add a Necro Slime or a Soul Slime? Because a lot of times you're going to be ditching them for using Witch, so that way you can pop stuff. And so you have to really decide, alright, do I want to maybe set up for a graveyard play? Can I set up for a graveyard play? Or do I want to keep this guy in hand so that way I can fusion summon maybe next turn, or maybe spell summon out a monster, such as, and set up for a rank 8 play, or something like that. And then Kepler. So this deck, you want to open up with 2 cards. Kepler, Gate, or Witch. You want to have 2 of these 3 cards in your hand. And the Chicken Game is nice to have, because if you have Chicken Game, then yeah, that's really good. But for the most part, you just want one of these cards. If you have Gate and Kepler, you can of course get the Witch with the Kepler and then search out a card to use Witch for. And if you have Kepler and Witch, you can search out the Gate and then use Gate's effect to search out something for Witch to use. And so it just works really well. And you tend to, most of the time, I would say you do open up with at least one of these cards, and most of the time 2 of these cards. I mean, as you can see, for the main deck, we have a lot of cards that help with consistency, such as our lure, such as our 1-for-1, which can summon Kepler or Necroslime, and then of course the 3 upstarts, and then the chicken games. The chicken games, again, this deck is mouse to out-resource your opponent, so over multiple turns, if you have your gate and your witch and chicken game out on the field and your opponent isn't destroying chicken game, you won. Just straight up you won. Because you're getting 3 cards every turn, you get your normal draw, and then you get a search off of gate, and then you get a draw off of chicken game, and each turn you're allowed to pop a card using witch, so that means you get rid of 2 of those cards and get rid of 2 of your opponent's cards, so that's a plus. You've netted 3 cards and your opponent lost 2, so that's where the whole out-resourcing comes from. And of course that also helps with having cards like Twin Twister in the deck and Regeki in the deck. Just 3 Twin Twisters are just great, especially with Dracopal being the big deck, because then it becomes and even more powerful. Like against Monarchs and Dracopals, Twin Twister is really good. Against Cosmos, I do side one out because they're not too heavy on back row. Cosmojo can be annoying, and you really can't pop Cosmo Town because then it will just search itself or search the card they want. But against Dracopals, of course, you can always pop the Pendulums, which is amazing, and just annoys your opponent. Or you can pop, if you're facing Monarchs, you can pop their Dominions and their Returns and their Marches. So Twin Twist is definitely a great stun card, and so I like him at 3. And then of course Gate's effect, all Dark Contract cards, if they're face up on field, will inflict 1000 damage to you during your standby phase. Which is unfortunate, and that's one reason why we're running Chicken Game, so that way you don't die. But during your main phase you can add 1 double D, and again if it's a double D, that means you can also add a triple D monster from your deck to your hand. And so it's a searcher, so again you gain multiple cards over multiple turns and you just go plus plus plus, and your opponent don't really have stuff. If you're facing Raid Raptors, and that sucks because they can search just as well, and so they also benefit from Chicken Game, but they don't have a Witch. They do have a Curse attack though. So although Raid Raptors isn't the most competitive deck there is, a Dark Contract with the Swamp King is another interesting card. We're only running 1 because you can use them to make dark, of course, but you can that's the only way you can make this guy, and this guy is important, so you really don't want to ditch him for Witch, as Witch can ditch a Dark Contract or DD card to pop stuff. But you use them to fusion summon. You can banish from your graveyard if you're fusion summoning a DD monster, or you can use your hand or on the field. And so most of the time you use stuff in your graveyard, you either draw into this card or late game search it, but really it's not the most important card in the deck. You don't really need it too badly, because this deck isn't about making big fields so much as just stopping your opponent and out-resourcing your opponent. Because Witch does magic, like you don't understand the magic that Witch does. And of course, triple Chicken Game, pay 1000 life points, draw 1 card. And then we're running 1 Minecraft, just 1 Minecraft. If you want to, you could run another Strike. I wouldn't want to, because again, these guys inflict damage to you. So you don't want to kill yourself or draw into it when you can't use it. And Minecraft, I feel it has the ability to just win games by itself. Like, oh, you gonna go for a Tribute Summon, call Theosalos? Oh, you had 2. That really sucks for you. Just stuff like that. Oh, you're gonna activate Monkey Keyboard, or you have Wizard in hand, or Luster Pendulum in hand. I'm gonna call, although I probably wouldn't call Luster Pendulum because I could summon him out using the fusion. But then nonetheless, it gives you a little bit of advantage. We are not running the virus cards, those virus trap cards, because, well, I will admit Epidemic Virus is the best because it can get rid of this card, and I hate that card. Those cards aren't very good. Crush Card Virus is awful against Cosmos because they can dump a whole bunch of machines and get their effects. And yeah, Deck Devastating Virus is a little bit good, but I just don't like them. I don't feel it's worth it because you have to get rid of one of your monsters. And again, I'm not focused on making these big monsters, so sometimes it just sits there. But Minecraft is always life. If you want to, you could run Bottomless. But I like Minecraft. And then Contract on Laundering is an interesting card. I only run 1 because it's kind of like our fourth Starlight Road, where if our opponent Twin Twisters us and they hit our Dark Contracts, you can just use this card, get rid of them, increase your life by 1000 for each, and then draw 2-3 cards, depending on how many you have on your field. And so that's very useful, again, out-resourcing your opponent. Your opponent just used 2 cards to pop 2 of your cards, and now hopefully you've used this card. Well, it is technically a minus using this card to get rid of 1 more card and you only draw 1 less. and so it is technically minus. You only use it when your opponent used Twin Twister. So overall, when it comes to cards both players have, when it comes to total resources, you should net more. So again, you out-resource your opponent. Of course, Starlight Road. We're running 3 Starlight Road because this card is amazing. Just amazing. Like, I understand some people are running Magical Deflector, and that's really good because it will negate the Dominion, it will negate Field spells, Quick Plays, Continuous, which is annoying against this deck because that means you can't use these guys, or Chicken Game. This card I feel is better because one, it can stop a Regeki play, and some people, like one of the top 8 players at YCS Prague was maining double Dark Hole and Regeki, so we might see players like that, so Starlight Road helps out there. And of course Twin Twister is a thing. Twin Twister can choose up to 2, but most people choose 2. Like, even after they know you have Starlight Road, they're still gonna pop 2. If they chose to pop 1, you're still out-resourcing them anyways because they discarded they used 2 cards to get rid of one of your cards, which can be devastating to this deck, which can be very annoying, but you should have other back row. And so Starlight Road just helps out overall. You get a summon out of Stardust, which can negate another Twin Twister, another Dark Hole, or Ignister, which is good. And, well, Ignister can run over Stardust. You should have, like, Witch to be able to pop them. And speaking of which, like I said, you ditch a DD or Dark Contract card from your hand and target a monster, pop it. Or a card on the field. And so that's what makes it so great, is that it's just whatever you want. Like, again, if you're facing dracopals and you have Twin Twisters, use this to get rid of their scale, and then this, if it just goes downhill, they make Ignister. Alright, you pop using Ignister. And so that's really great for this deck. I just didn't. And you don't really, like, need to control a DD monster. You, like, once it's on the field, as long as you have a DD or Dark Contract in your hand, you can just use it. And so it's just really nice having this card. Plus, all Fiend type monsters gain 1000 attack, which is very annoying. It makes it so that way they can't run over cards like your Darks and other Fiend type monsters you run. So that's just a really good, perfect overall. Just your monsters are 3000 plus beaters, and it gets to pop a card, so it's just really great. Do note though that Trap Eater, as you can see, I am running a lot of Floodgates and continuous cards in my side deck. Trap Eater wrecks this deck. That's the only card I hasn't been able to figure out, because if they have Trap Eater in their hand, you're screwed. And so that's just something you have to be careful. Some people run Decree, some people don't. Decree isn't that bad because you have, again, triple Twin Twister, and if they activate it, you can chain this card and pop it. So as long as you get the advantage, then it should be alright. And then of course running 1 Solemn Strike, very expensive. If you cannot get this card, then you're gonna have to find something else. Maybe another Mind Crush, maybe another Bottomless. Torrential might not be bad either, but Solemn Strike is definitely very useful, and so is Solemn Warning. I do side out Strike against Monarchs because they can choose the chain order with Return and prevent it, so that way you can't use Strike, and so I just run Warning instead. And so that is it for the main deck. For the extra deck, we have Oblivion King. Oblivion King is a relinquish. You attack a monster, you bounce a DD or Dark Contract. 9 times out of 10, you want to bounce your Dark Contract cards, so that way you don't kill yourself, because it just helps not to have them on the field, because if something goes wrong, you're not going to take 1000 damage. So most of the time you want to bounce your Dark Contracts, and then you get to equip a monster and he gains that attack. So he can get really big. He doesn't target, so he gets around March, and he gets around Cosmo Machine type monsters. Just be careful with Cosmos though, because if the Cosmo Machine is destroyed, then they get its effect. So that's a little bit unfortunate, but he jumps up to like a 6000 beater most of the time, really easily. So you inflict a huge amount of damage to your opponent, and that's really nice. And of course we have Dark. Every time you would take damage, you gain that much, and he's a level 7, so he sets up our rank 7 place. Yeah, I'll talk about Vortex later. Stardust, we're only running 1, really only need 1. Like, yes, we're running 3, and each time you can summon them. Do know with Starlight Road, you don't have to summon. You don't have to summon Stardust in order for it to get off, so if you don't even have a Stardust Dragon in your extra deck, don't worry about it. You can still activate it to negate. It negates first, and then summons out Stardust. And I only feel like 1 is needed, because you tend to see 2 maybe. Again, like, my rule is you always see 1 minus the total copies of the cards. You should always expect to see 1 minus the total numbers of cards you see of that number of copies you see. So this card we'd see you should expect to see 2 of these cards per game. Just like you should, well, which you can search, but this card you can't search, you expect 2. Duodon King Kali Yuga. This guy is a heavy storm during either player's turn, which is really nice, especially against monarchs, just like, oh, bye-bye everything. When he's summoned, if your opponent cannot negate his summon, every card on the field is negated that's face up, and face downs cannot be activated. Which is really good because he negates Chicken Game, so that means you can then deal damage and probably kill them without having to worry about Chicken Game. He also has the effect where you can detach an XYZ material to target a Dark Contract, spell trap card in your graveyard, and set that target. So if you do Heavy Storm, you can get back one of them. Wow, this video is getting long, but that's because I love this deck. Wow. Felgrand's definitely very useful. Being able to negate a monster effect, again, just having another stun card that just really messes with your opponent, or being able to target one of your own monsters and say, yeah, you can't Monarch Storm with it. Lancelot, I haven't tested him recently. I was running originally running 2 Kali Yugas, but then I realized I didn't make them all that much. In fact, I was making Felgrand more often. And I also ran some of the Galaxy ones, like the Full Metal, Photon Armor, or whatever one it's called. It was the 4,000 meter that can pop a monster. But then I switched him out because I didn't like him. I liked this guy a lot. You can attack directly if he has XYZ material, which is useful. Definitely useful as a 2,000 meter. And if your opponent activates a spell trap or monster effect, you can detach an XYZ material from this card and negate the activation. So that's really great. Just like, again, out-resourcing your opponent. If you have your back or if you have everything set up, this is just a 1 card minus for your opponent. No matter what, it's mandatory. Do note that that's mandatory. That's actually useful. Because again, like I was saying with Strike, how Strike can't negate Monarchs if they have Return out and they choose Return as Chain Link 2. He will negate a monster effect, a Monarch effect, even if they have Return, because he's mandatory. They activate the Monarch effect, he activates immediately, and then they get to activate Return because he's mandatory, and so that's very useful. That's how I believe it works. I might be wrong, but definitely I like him. I feel he'd help out a lot. And then for rank 7s, we have Absolute Dragon. He's kind of like a threat. You can use him to summon out Vortex Dragon, that's why we're running him, of course. And Vortex Dragon is what's really annoying because, again, he negates a card, so it makes your opponent lose cards. But he can negate an attack, and then so that can be really annoying for your opponent. They might not want to Monarch Storm forth him. You be able to direct what cards your opponent uses, and just be able to control them, and that can become really annoying. Of course, if you're afraid, like if you're facing like Nister or something like that, and you really want to summon out Vortex, you can pop him with Witch, because Witch can target any monster on the field, and then you can summon out Vortex Dragon and be like, I get to negate a card and bounce a card, because Vortex Dragon bounces attack position monster to the hand, and you can return one of your Pendulum monsters from the extra deck to your deck to negate a card, and which happens a lot because of your Keplers and the whatnot. Of course, we're also running Draco Sack to pop stuff and Big Eye to steal stuff, and then of course running Wave King Caesar, which can only be made with Beowulf. We're not running that rank 5 that you put on top of him. I don't like him. This guy's really awesome because if you detach an XYZ material, all of your DD monsters that were destroyed this turn are summoned at the end of the battle phase, which is really nice. You do take 1,000 damage for each, but if you summon out this guy, then you don't. You gain that life. And of course, if he leaves the field, you can add a Dark Contract card from your deck to hand, which is definitely very good. But he also has the other ruling where if your opponent doesn't enter the battle phase, you don't get the summon, which isn't bad because then they don't attack you. And then we're running Dullahan because he can half, he's a Gale, he just gets to half your opponent's monster. He's a 1200 beater, but he's a Dark Fiend, which is awesome because he doesn't interfere with our rivalries or our Gozens, and he gains the 1000 attack from this card because of all Fiend type monsters. So he becomes a 22 beater during your opponent's turn that can half. And you make him actually pretty often. Like if you start to control the duel, if you get field advantage, you might actually end up making him, because you end up with a Kepler, he lasts the turn, and then you may search out another one just to make either this guy, or because you want to get one of your other backers, you want to get like this card or something. And that is it for the extra deck. Again, just continuing with the theme of out-resourcing your opponent, the whole gaining life, and then being able to use Chicken Game more and more and more, and being able to activate both of these and the whatnot is very useful. For our extra deck, I'm going to organize these by the decks they're used for. So Wavering Eyes is for dracopals, of course. And then other cards for dracopals is, of course, Goes in Match and then Rivalry. That's it. Mind Crush is for kozmos, same with Light Imprisoned Mirror, and then one of each of the rivalries. And then also one Imperial Envoy. That does hurt this deck because you do banish these guys, and you do banish for this card. But I feel overall this deck can withstand that. It's not really important. If you don't like it, you don't have to run it. And then for monarchs, we have Mask of Restrict and Appropriate, which I'll talk about, and then one Goes and one Rivalry, and then another Mind Crush, because they do a lot of searching. And so that is the extra deck, and yes, I talked about kozmos and Light Imprisoned Mirror. This card can wreck a lot of stuff. Like, it wasn't good against Necros, because I tried it against Necros when they were big, because they were all different. Not necessarily that card, but this card. But it didn't really work out. But this format, it works out really well, because for this deck, they're all Dark Fiends. So you can summon out whatever you want. You just pretty much can't summon out these guys. Some of your special monsters, like you can't summon out Stardust Dragon, but you can still use Starlight Road. So no downside there. Just it wrecks monarchs because you have your Erebus as a zombie, you have Idea as a fairy, no warrior, and Aether as a fairy, and so it's just really, really annoying for your opponent. And there's Light and Darks and the stuff, whatnot. Appropriate is great against monarchs. I've only seen it a couple times. You do not get to draw the first time you activate this, and you can only flip it face up once your opponent draws a card, but it makes them think twice about activating cards like Maxi. It makes them think about activating cards like Pandeity. And so, or actually, if they're smart, they would activate them anyways because they need to get those cards, and then you out-resource them because you're drawing as well. And so then you just end up with a big hand. It's an empty threat just like Maxi, because if they can OTK you, it doesn't matter how many cards you have in your hand, you're gonna get OTK'd. But it's most of the time you shouldn't be getting OTK'd. You should have other cards like your Starlight Roads, your Witches, or maybe some of your other stuff that you cite in. And Mask of Restrict is really good. Of course, this is all control. If they get rid of it, it does nothing. But this card though, this card's awesome because it just makes people cry. And honestly, it's why I like Starlight Road better, because you can, if you do set your scales, which you should never do in this deck, but if you do, you can negate a Wavering Eyes with Starlight Road. Hope you guys enjoyed this deck profile. It was extremely long. That's because I'm really going into this deck. I'm thinking of playing it at Regionals, which is in April. It's like next month. So hopefully you guys enjoy this deck profile. Tell me guys what you think of DDDs. Do you think they're actually possible to make a good deck? Again, it's all about outreach.